Two things are infinite: the universe and human stupidity. And I'm not sure about the universe. Armageddon, Ragnarok, Doomsday. How in the world do you even make an introduction to something like that? My mind has been in overdrive the last couple of days, so forgive me if I don't sound like my usual calm and rational self. This is a matter of life and death. This is my warning to humanity. I don't even know how this happened. We shouldn't have done it. What were we thinking? Playing in God's domain. That's what we did. But we were self-righteous men thinking our intelligence would protect us. My father was a scientist and taught me to have passion for knowledge. Often, when we were done studying for school, he would quiz me on some of the most profound questions that still puzzle me to this day. Someday, you will find the answer. I'm sure of it, he would say. Seeds of inspiration that were planted in my brain soon germinated as time passed. After finishing high school at the top of my class, I received so many academic scholarships to prestigious universities that it was honestly overwhelming. I wanted to fulfill my dreams, but Dad's health was failing and Mom wasn't around. You should always look to the future, Mel, but don't try to change it. Your aspirations should be to benefit the here and now. The future is always meant to be written, not foretold. Dad told me, when I confided in him, that my theories weren't getting any traction in scientific magazines. He always encouraged my endeavors, but often warned that science had its limits. I needed to have balance in my life. Thus, I ended up going to a lesser-known university located in a very obscure part of the country. I honestly did not care about the big-name schools and the prestige that comes with it. I just wanted to follow my dreams. The headmaster had explained that with my scholarship, some of the more questionable aspects of my field of study would be allowed, as long as the university would be given credit. And I didn't care about that. Discovery was its own reward. It's that simple for me. All I needed was a decent lab and some good professors to guide me on my path to becoming a true scientist. I was determined to be a man that pursues knowledge for the betterment of everyone, and not for the glory of oneself. Circumstances didn't always work in my favor, but I never lost sight of my dream. Even as Dad was on his deathbed, I would publish scientific studies and hypotheses, hoping that my academic record and the search for knowledge would eventually spark interest beyond my little corner of the world. One fateful day, I received an email from a government official. It was nothing sketchy that I could tell. I have closely worked with the government on more than a few occasions over the years. And no, it was nothing top secret, such as reverse engineering alien technology. It was mostly things like lending a hand to some colleagues of mine that work in the Department of Energy and other such projects. I had no reason to believe it would change my life, or the course of history itself. Dear Dr. Malcolm Lastery, we would like to thank you once again for assisting the US government on countless projects that benefit the citizens of this fine country. Your expertise in the field of physics is unmatched, and we appreciate you working closely with us. It is because of these outstanding achievements that we feel your skills would prove to be beneficial in another project that we would like to disclose with you. A location will be sent to your mobile device with further details. We appreciate your cooperation, Dr. Lastery. Janus. Just as I finished, I heard the ping of my phone, just as the email had specified. Time and date and location was provided. I quickly jotted it down as the message was declared time sensitive and deleted automatically just moments after I got it. I have to admit that I was puzzled by the offer. There had been no mention of a salary or even the sort of work I would be doing. But with my father having passed away, I couldn't see a reason to remain at the university. Besides, the headmaster had assured me that if I wasn't satisfied with what they had to offer, I could always return. The location was up in the northern mountains of my county. It was quite a long drive, and quite dreary. A mood that seemed to swallow up the entire world as I struggled to stay on the road. After driving the mountain pass for a few hours, the main highway ended, and I found myself on what most people would consider dirt bike trails. Here, I was even more cautious as my vehicle jostled and shook, leaving behind any trace of normalcy as I pushed forward. Then, once all signs of civilization had faded away, I reached a large white gate. The walls were high with barbed wires, and there were multiple cameras to watch my approach. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to get out of the car or not, but then I saw a device next to the big white gate. I pressed the button that looked like a buzzer, and then someone answered.
State your code.
My code? Then I remembered the message I received on my phone. I thought it was the name of the meeting, but it was actually a code. Janus. A loud buzz rocked the eerie silence, and the gate started to open with a low creak. I got back in my car and drove inside, eager to find out what was going on. It was a big property, almost like an estate or manor. I was driving on a long road, surrounded by large fields of well-cut grass and marble statues on both sides. It was nighttime, but I imagined that it would probably look like a golf course. I followed the path and signs, and eventually reached a hole in the ground that led to a parking garage. I parked next to the other cars in the small parking lot. I stepped out and smelled the air. It smelled like mystery. If I knew what I know now, I would have burned that building down. I approached the elevator to my left in the garage, and was immediately met by an old man in military uniform. His face was old, wrinkled and freckled, but he didn't show a flicker of concern for me. I could see that the wars he had served had not been kind to him. Even though he was shorter than me, I felt intimidated by his presence. He stood to one side and reached out a hand to greet me. I shook it with a firm grip, not wanting to give a weak first impression. "Dr. Lestry, we've been expecting you. I'm Colonel James Romero of the Janus Project." He pressed for the 6th floor below us, and I stood beside him without saying a word. The old elevator shook and rattled as we descended into the earth, lights flickering and a sense of unease growing as I lost sight of the surface. I had this strange feeling I wouldn't see it again. Romero led me to a dimly lit room and told me to sit and wait. I took my seat and looked at the room around me. It looked just like an interrogation room that you see in movies. Just a table and a few chairs. The colonel then stepped out of the room and closed the door behind him. I sat there for a while, just waiting. It felt like forever. Finally, the door opened and a very stereotypical government agent in a black suit walked in and sat down opposite of me. He passed me a manila envelope. He spoke sternly, but passionately about my reason for being here. "Welcome to the Advanced Technology Developmental Facility, Mr. Lestry. I'm Wesley Armitage. It's a pleasure to have you on board." "Thank you for having me. I really like the decor of the room." I was trying to crack a joke, but Agent West looked at me with a poker face. There was an awkward silence for a short moment, and then the man in black opened his copy of the same folder. "I think it's best for both of us if we cut to the chase and discuss the future conundrum. A hypothesis you published last year on temporal relocation. Although you may have assumed that the paper received little notice, we here at Janus believe that it holds potential unlike any we have ever seen." "Oh, thanks, but it's only theoretical. For now at least. I haven't been able to find funding for further research on it. I admit it, surprised that one of my crackpot theories had been the one selected. Why hadn't they looked over my more noted acclamations? We can provide all the funding and resources you need, should you sign a 2-year contract with us. My mouth felt dry as he passed me the lengthy paperwork and a black ballpoint pen. You're not serious. Janus is willing to offer you a blank check and no boundaries for your work. The only catch, we will be the first to be able to determine if it's a viable solution for our needs. I didn't know what to say. I've spent most of my career chasing this concept, this idea that is so absurd and impossible to others. But not to me. To me, it was very plausible. I just didn't have the resources I needed to further my research and eventually perform experiments to confirm my theory. And it was more than that. It was the possibility of being able to see my father again. Something, until this moment I thought, was just a fantasy. And now, they were offering me salvation for my dreams. This is a lot to ask. Truth be told, I'm not sure that 2 years will be enough time. Sorry for that pun. To really get this done, I'll need a lot of resources and manpower and... Armitage raised his hand up and remarked, "We aren't just expecting you to do all this in your garage, Doctor. In fact, based on the hypothesis you established in your paper, we've already begun on a prototype." I was shocked and speechless again. The government has been trying to build a time machine? And it was based on my research? We are on the cusp of discovery. We know it's possible. And it's only a question of getting the answer before someone, somewhere around the world, figures it out before we do. And that's why we've gathered all the prominent researchers in your field and offered them the choice to work for us. That is why you're here. Why the future is dependent on your cooperation. You make it sound like this is a military operation, I said. Romero raised an eyebrow, clearly upset by my generalized view. But I wasn't sure I liked the idea of my theory being weaponized. Lastly, I understand that men of your caliber often think in terms of what is best for mankind. But that isn't how the world works. We live in a society that thrives off of power. The top dog is the one that holds most of the pie, and nothing would ever surpass the ability to travel across time. It would set us up as the one and only superpower. Armitage was starting to sound like an asshole and a bit of a maniac. But he was right. I knew I couldn't pass up this chance. After a few seconds, I said that I was in agreement. Agent Wesley didn't seem to react at all to my answer, almost as though he expected the response. If you told me that this guy was a robot, I would have probably believed you. I signed the papers and passed them back. Welcome to the Janus Project. Let's go make the future, he said, with a devilish smirk. Soon afterwards, I found myself working day and night with men and women from all around the world in a secluded underground lab for Janus. Professor Petrol, a German quantum physicist, was all too eager to explain their progress so far as the weeks passed. We already ran tests on small objects, living organisms such as rats and mice. We would program the machine to relocate a mouse to the past, where we had placed food items such as cheese, and transfer it back to the present after a length of time. We would then study the aging process and look at the digestive tract. When we looked at the cells of these rodents, we couldn't find any abnormality. Aged tissues also looked normal and healthy. There were no biomarkers for cancer or any other diseases. We've even performed this with bigger animals, and after running the statistical analysis, we concluded that there were no significant adverse effects due to temporal relocation. That's astounding. I'm surprised you even need me, I admitted as I realized what the next step was. The machine had developed so rapidly that the possibility of time travel wasn't even theory anymore. There have been a few bumps in the road. Nothing that we haven't already expected, mind you. But it would seem that longer periods of time between the different relocations tend to cause issues, as well as trying to send anything living into the future. Another scientist named Ward admitted as he pointed toward a small box that was filled with goop and bones. Above it was a chalkboard with the word failures in all capital letters and scratches. 23, and not a single success to the future. Looks like we have some work ahead of us, gentlemen, I realized. 2 weeks later, thanks to some tinkering and adjustments, I felt we were ready to send someone into the past. Janus gave us the go-ahead without so much as a blink. The volunteer was given a special device to wear around their wrist, almost like a watch. Their test was meant to be very simplistic. The volunteer would be transferred 6 hours into the past to a specific room in our facility. This room is completely empty, save for a pen and a piece of paper. We call it the background. All the volunteer has to do is pick up the pen and paper and write on it. After writing on it, the volunteer will drop the paper and keep the pen and rejoin the present with the given wrist device. They were told repeatedly not to do anything else. From our point of view, the volunteer was gone only for an instant. Then, he returned to the present with the ball pen in his hand and tears in his eyes. He couldn't believe it. He had made it back in one piece. We all sprinted to the room where the volunteer was transferred 6 hours into the past. There it was. The damn pen and paper was still there. I picked up the paper and analyzed it. There was nothing on it. "Check the tapes. Check the equipment," Karl ordered. I kept looking at the pen and paper, very confused by this sudden result. Did it mean that our experiment was a failure? I held it up and tried to get a better look at it. "What exactly did you write?" I asked the man. It was then I realized he hadn't stopped crying. He was blabbering like an infant. Romero opted to quarantine him for the next 48 hours as we continue with the experiment, confirming at least that from the readings of the machine that he had gone into the past. Could it be that he created an alternate timeline whenever he wrote on the paper? And that's why we haven't been able to determine a change? Ward asked one day over lunch. It could only be that time itself rippled when he traveled through it, and an adjacent timeline is now existing alongside our own. If so, it's something that would likely be impossible to prove unless the change was more drastic. Like going back and killing Hitler when he was a baby or something? Karl asked. More like killing his parents before they even got married. It will help us to determine if the universe creates alternate paths that lead to the same conclusions, or if divergent ones are formed and establish different futures. But again, I'm not entirely sure there is a way to prove this theory. If we are wrong, a major change to the timeline could cause irreparable harm to us and destroy the fabric of time itself. I admit it. Suddenly, I was realizing that in my efforts to make this breakthrough, I haven't once stopped to realize that the consequences would be so dire, especially with the military lingering around, eager to apply it in wartime. There was no way they would be careful enough to make sure that the timeline wasn't severely altered. Maybe we should do something helpful in the past, like saving the Titanic or JFK. Ward suggested. I mulled it over, a sudden idea popping into my head. If I was wrong, I didn't want anyone else to suffer or watch this entire timeline disappear. So I kept my thoughts to myself. That night, I thought about my dad. 3 years had passed, and I missed him more and more. If I had known what I know now, I could save him with the treatments we have available, stop him from overdosing. It was risky, but I couldn't let it go. So, I snuck into the facility that night on the pretense of working late. Nobody questioned me. I've been here long enough that I could easily waltz in. On my way to the machine, I checked on the volunteer, worried about their mental state. Somehow I knew they had gotten worse. They had scribbled on the wall 2 words over and over with a broken chalk piece. A and O. Alpha and Omega, I guessed. It was unnerving to watch, as I realized they seemed to have lost all grasp of reality. Would the same fate befall me for traveling back in time? I went to the machine testing site next. Unsurprised that after the last experiment, it was left unguarded. I hastily got everything ready and held my breath as I got inside. It was now or never to prove that this could work. It was now or never to prove that this could work. I thought as the door to the machine opened and I stepped in. The cold air of the machine and the thrum of noise filled my ears as I held onto my backpack and closed my eyes. Flashing lights and sound covered my entire body. Until at last, I was in darkness, swallowed up and spat back out. I was crossing a black hole, an endless amount of ray of lights being consumed by the mouth of a void. My reflection and my conscious self were shifting side by side, watching as thousands, or perhaps even millions of years were destroyed over and over by the dangerous edges of the hole. A sinkhole into time itself. My other selves were tearing themselves apart, screaming into the emptiness. I was falling into the hole, my reflection hitting me like a car crash. Suddenly, there were tufts of grass shoved into my face, and I was hardly able to catch my breath as I looked around the hillside. This was where the facility I worked at was going to stand 20 years from now. I realized as I gathered my things and checked the device on my wrist. 24 hours. Not much time, but hopefully enough. I ran to the foot of the base of the hill, where the road connected to the mountains. It took almost 2 hours to flag down a motorist, and I gave him enough cash to not ask questions and take me into the city. Before I realized that it's happened, I am at my father's doorstep. The day my mother left. The day he begins to lose his faith in humanity. I take a breath and exhale, ready to walk up the door and knock. Out of the corner of my eye, I see dark tinged clouds, but I brush it aside. I have a job to do. Dad opens the door and looks at me like I'm some sort of Mormon preacher. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Mr. Lestery? I'm with the government. Can I come in?" He reluctantly lets me in, and his wife, my mother, offers me tea. I can't help but to feel strange as I see that she is cradling a child. A child that will one day grow up to become me. What I'm about to say is likely going to sound bizarre, but it's vital that you listen. It will mean the safety and security of your family for the next 20 years. They both give me odd looks, and I reach into my pocket and take out a checkbook. "Your research into quantum mechanics is revolutionary, Mr. Lestery. And we want to make sure you and your family are provided for so that it can reach the next level. This will give you the chance to take care of them and yourself without any concerns whatsoever." They are speechless, skeptical, but I assured them the offer is legit. And I know that by accepting it, my family will be financially secure, and my mother will have no reason to leave, and my father will live to see his own dream fulfilled. We need to discuss this privately if that's okay, my father tells me. I say nothing and wait as they go to the next room. Meanwhile, I'm staring down at the infant version of myself, amused that my presence hasn't altered the timeline. For a short burst, those strange circling dark swirls cloud my vision, and I have a headache. Then, I hear a gunshot. Immediately, I stand up, frozen in confusion, as my father enters the room, holding a small pistol straight at my head. Behind him, I can see the dead eyes of my mother. Then, he cocks the weapon and warns me. I told you once before, boy, the future ain't meant to be trifled with. Then, he shoots me in the chest. I fall back, completely shocked by his reaction as blood spills out of my chest. He stands over me and remarks, "You think that it's mere coincidence that I set you on this path, Malcolm? Where do you think I'm from? I escaped the future that you are trying to create. So stop now while you're ahead. Stop before you wind up like me." I gasp and frantically hit the buttons on my wristband. The blackness swallowing me whole again. This time, I feel pain, pulsing light and swirling noises as I struggle to breathe, and I'm hurled forward in time. When I stopped, I felt the cold earth around me and crawled toward my old landline. The house was empty now, the way I had left it when Dad died. I dialed 911 just as I fell unconscious. A week had passed, and I recovered from the wound. Ward was given the task to lead the project, while I was placed on rehabilitation and pondered the revelations of my father. He was from the future. A future he said he had escaped, just to raise me in the past. A past that he refused to let me alter. What did all of it mean? I was confused and unsettled. But it did establish one thing. Temporal relocation into the future was a possibility that he seemed to fear. And as I recovered, I decided I would make it my goal to prove him wrong about the future. We can write our own ending, I told myself as I was allowed back to the lab. Over the next few weeks, I did everything in my power to convince Armitage and the others in charge that moving to the future wasn't just a theory anymore. I even signed off on being a volunteer. Eventually, thanks to better testing and temporal relocation to the past, they allowed me to start the process. The day it was supposed to happen, I went to visit my father's grave. There was so much I still didn't understand. Answers that I thought the future would give me. Romero selected a fully armed squad to come with me into the future for the control test. They thought that the very initial event should be small and controlled. But they didn't know I had other plans. The bright flashing lights filled the machine, and the noise returned. I was expecting to see the void, to peer beyond the abyss and be lost again. Instead, this time, it was an infinite horizon of shining iridescent colors that made me nearly blind. The numbing headache of the relocation was already affecting the soldiers around me as they struggled to remain composed. Then, the entire stream of endless colors stretched and collided all at once. I was moving toward the light at a speed faster than humanly possible. I knew it would only give me a short time to act, as they could hardly stand up straight or not vomit. I leapt from the machine, crashing onto the dark soil of the future and catching my breath. It took me a few moments to realize that this wasn't a dream, and that as I looked about, I was standing in a hellscape. We only went forward a single year. I thought that would be safe, but the world in front of me told me that I was wrong. The sky was bleak, toxic clouds blocking any glimpse of sunlight, Fire and brimstone filled my nostrils as I saw the dead soil and the parched air. This was an apocalypse. And worse yet, I could see war machines scouring the land, destroying what little was left and killing one another endlessly. Amid that battlefield, I saw strange swirling dark clouds again, the ones I had seen in the past when my father tried to stop me. Was this some kind of temporal rift that was happening even as I observed it? I wasn't sure, but I kept my head down and hurried back to the lab where the experiment had begun. Much to my surprise, the facility was nearly destroyed and dilapidated. Only corpses were littering the floors. I saw a group of soldiers hunting survivors, so I had to hide. "Keep a lookout for the last scientist, Lestery. He is the one we need to make sure is dead." My blood ran cold as I recognized the voice. Romero. He had turned on us. A dark realization filled my thoughts. The warnings of my father. The military were using our technology to destroy their enemies. As a result, a dangerous Cold War in time had begun, and Mother Earth was suffering. I hurried deeper into the facility where the remains of the machine were at. I needed to see just how far this was going to go, if mankind even had hope still. I set it for 100 years into the future and stepped into the numbing endlessness of time again. This was far worse than any other experience I had jumping from one spot in time to another. I was losing sense of self, meshing with reality, and felt as though my body would tear in two. My mind could see endless possibilities, a universe of screams and madness as I cascaded across a century of horror. The Earth was ravaged by war, eventually leading to a nuclear holocaust. Then darkness set in, and then the planet began to die. When the machine finally settled down, I worried that not even air would be left to breathe. Then, I realized that my own body was already starting to break down. I was losing connection to anything in our universe. I stumbled out, trying to find even a glimmer of life on the dead planet. Then, I saw a figure standing there, an immaculate being of light that was waiting for me. My father. "Malcolm, it's almost time," he said with a nod. "You knew I would come?" I asked. "Of course. History has already been written. Prophecy fulfilled. I tried so hard to stop you, but it was like trying to prevent a tidal wave. Inevitably, the universe's self-preservation kicked in," he said, gesturing to the world that was beginning to crumble away. Stars were falling into the void, the ground beneath us hardly even feeling firm anymore. "Existence is being rewritten, my son. This is the end, and the beginning. Thanks to our meddling, time itself has now become an endless loop, an eternal montage of suffering that can never be broken," he said as he took my hand. I saw infinity as my human body was lost amid the destruction of reality. I watched as everything began to fall apart around me. Disintegration into a million different universes as I was ascending to a higher plane. I was becoming the universe itself. I was a god, and I was trapped. I could see eternity spanning before me in all directions as the machine began to tighten its grip over every aspect of our universe. Time was meaningless, and suffering became eternal. We were the cause of all life, and the cause of its destruction. My father and I were doomed now to watch it play out, again and again, helpless to stop as time marched forward toward another doomsday. I left behind a single journal, this warning to any in this current reality that cares for listening. I know I have failed each time in the past, but I refuse to give up hope. Do not make our mistakes. Do not doom the human race. Existence is too fragile. Life is too precious. Time is too dangerous. Use what little of it you have left to make a difference.